Roadhouse is one of the most unserious movies I have seen in a while, and man, I thought this movie was so entertaining. Now, I will say I have not seen the original Roadhouse. That was a little bit before my time, and maybe one day I'll sit down and find the time and check that thing out, but I really had no movie to compare this remake to, so I kind of watched it and had to judge it on its own, and in my opinion, I thought this movie was super fun and super entertaining, even though it did have a couple problems, so let's talk about it. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Roadhouse. So this movie follows Jake Gyllenhaal's character known as Dalton, and he is a former UFC fighter. But when he finds a job down in the Florida Keys as a bouncer at a roadhouse, he soon realizes that this job isn't exactly what he thought it would be. As always, starting things off with the good, and the first thing I have here is Jake Gyllenhaal. Now, as unserious as this movie was, Jake Gyllenhaal was all in for his role in this movie, and it showed. I mean, he showed up shredded for this thing. He played this perfect mix of this happy, nice guy who could pretty much take out anyone and is also low-key psychotic if you push him far enough. His character also had this unbothered arrogance about him that made him pretty funny. And this all starts in that first fight scene they had at the roadhouse where he's asking those biker guys if they have health insurance and if there is a hospital nearby, right before he literally slaps the living life out of these guys. But that scene not only set the tone for Jake Gyllenhaal's character, but really for this whole movie as well. But yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal was funny throughout this entire film, and he was really a big part on why this movie was so entertaining for me. Next up for the good, I have the action/fighting scenes. Now, in my opinion, these scenes were probably the strongest part of this movie. Now, I will say you do have to suspend your disbelief a couple of times when it comes to the bigger scale action scenes in this movie, but when it came to the bare knuckle hand-to-hand fight scenes, those were awesome. And with the way these fights were shot, you will feel like you feel every punch that was thrown in this movie, and there will be quite a few moments where you're sitting there and you kind of make a face like, ooh man, I know that hurt. And with the unserious tone of this movie, there was quite a bit of humor in some of these action scenes, whether it was Jake Gyllenhaal smacking people across the face, or whether it was Conor McGregor just being Conor McGregor. Next for the good, I have the humor and just the overall unserious tone of this movie. Now, I'll admit I laughed quite a bit during this film. There were so many moments that were just unintentionally funny because of how unserious this thing was. I mean, the scene towards the end of the movie where Knox, who is Conor McGregor's character, is fighting Dalton in that little speedboat, and he has this little thing in his hand and he says, look at this little octagon we got here, and it's clearly not an octagon, and then Jake Gyllenhaal's character is like, who taught you shapes? I just thought that part of the movie was hilarious. I mean, I laughed out loud during that moment. It was just the way some of these jokes were delivered in this film that just made it so funny and entertaining for me. I mean, there's literally a part where Dalton is getting his head smashed on a piano, and the whole movie stops just so we can say, man, this piano's out of tune. And it's parts like that that just make this thing so entertaining for me. But the reason I think this type of humor works for this film is because this film doesn't take itself too seriously. It knows exactly what it is, and that kind of allows you to sit back and relax and laugh at these more unserious moments. And finally for the good, and I just have to mention him, and that is Conor McGregor. Now, this was his acting debut, and he stole the show in some scenes in this film. I mean, he pretty much just played Conor McGregor times 10, but once again, because this movie is so unserious, that cartoony character that he played worked in this movie, and it was kind of hilarious most of the time. I mean, this was probably the perfect movie and the perfect role for him to start out in. His character was just a complete psycho throughout the entire movie, but that's what made him so entertaining, and there are going to be so many memes created because of his character, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, his character really is just a walking meme throughout this entire movie. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I really have here is the relationship between Dalton and Ellie, I think her name was. It just felt really forced in my opinion, and honestly, I think the movie would have been fine without it. It just felt like one of those situations that they had two attractive characters, so obviously they have to be together for some reason, and that just really didn't work for me. This relationship really wasn't convincing at all. It felt half-baked, and it really didn't have any effect on the plot. I just feel like they could have made the same movie if they were just friends, and then that relationship wouldn't have felt forced at all. It would have felt more natural and organic and like it belonged in the movie instead of them getting into a romantic relationship. And finally, getting into the bad, and the first thing I have here is that you are going to have to suspend your disbelief a few times in this movie, especially in the end of this thing, because during the third act of this film, there are quite a few Fast and Furious type moments that are just gonna leave you saying, how in the world is that even possible? I mean, the scene where the villain of this movie gets flung like 50 feet off of his boat and into the roadhouse and somehow survives it and comes out unscathed is one of those moments where you just have to shake your head and move on. And then there was also the moment where Jake Gyllenhaal crashes his boat into the other in order to fling himself onto the other boat, and it was just one of those moments where I was just like, okay, that's not how physics works. So yeah, in that third act, they definitely throw physics out the window a couple of times, which is weird because up until that point, a lot of the action scenes were very much bare knuckle fighting throughout this entire movie, and it was really that third act that they just decided to go all Fast and Furious on you. And lastly, for the bad, I have what they did with the backstory of Dalton. Now, I thought the backstory they gave him was a pretty cool concept. It's just that they didn't really dive into it all that much throughout the movie. And by the time they did decide to dive into his backstory, it was really just too late for me to care. I mean, throughout this entire movie, they kind of kept you in the dark on his UFC career, and it really wasn't till like right before the third act of this movie that they revealed that he killed his friend in the octagon. And I just feel if we would have got that reveal a little bit earlier in the movie, I think that would have been better for his character because we would have gotten the chance to explore that a little bit more than we did. But since they put that at the end of the movie, they kind of just revealed it and then had to move on, so it really didn't carry as much weight as I thought it could have. But overall, this movie is super entertaining. Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor are great, and the fight scenes are just awesome. Yes, it has plenty of problems, but it's so unserious and entertaining that I can let that slide and just have fun with it. Those are my thoughts on Roadhouse. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.